I beat an international master at chess. This is a massive milestone in my personal chess journey. For those who don't know, International Master is the second highest title awarded by FIDE, which is the world governing chess body. To achieve the International Master title, you typically have to reach 2400 FIDE rating and achieve 3 different norms. There are some other ways to get the title too, but we'll skip those for now. Long story short, becoming an IM is an incredible feat that I personally am nowhere near yet. So to be able to play against an International Master and secure a win is a really big accomplishment for me. In fact, based off our ratings, I had a 1% chance to win this game. So here's the game, and as you can see, I'm playing black. I have a disadvantage to start the game. One other important piece of context is that in this tournament, my opponent was leading. He was in first place. With a win, he would secure a victory. With a loss, he would drop out of the top 3. So there are a lot of stakes in this game. Let's jump in. My opponent plays d4. I respond d5. After knight f3, knight f6, bishop f4, we now have a standard London setup. Everyone's favorite London system. So after c5, c3, knight c6, we now have a position that is pretty typical. White has a very, very minor edge, but it's pretty even. We get e3, we get e6, and then we get this move knight bd2. So if you look at the pieces on the board, what can we surmise? Well, obviously, material is equal. White has some development going. And very importantly, you got to look at the pawns. So this pawn chain, all the pawns are on dark squares. So what I want to do in this position is I want to play knight h5. Knight h5 attacking the dark square bishop. White plays bishop g5, trying to hold on to the bishop. And I immediately take the opportunity to play queen b6. We get queen b3 from my opponent. And here there's a really important moment. I could do a couple things here. I could continue to develop with bishop d7. I could play h6, forcing the bishop away, and that's what I choose to do. This is the idea in this position. So if black first were to take my queen, this is not bad, but it's a slight inaccuracy because it allows me to fix my pawns in a way where these 2 double pawns are actually pretty powerful moving up the b file, and it further reinforces the c pawn. White does not win at tempo because white actually has to move the dark square bishop. So after bishop h4, obviously I still want to strike out, play g5, and this is all part of my preparation, so not really much to see here besides I want to trade off this knight for the dark square bishop. So white recaptures, and again we're met with a decision here. Do I want to take the queen? Do I want to, I don't know, push the pawn? Do I want to develop my bishop? Do I want to develop my bishop to either of these squares, develop my light square bishop? There's a lot to decide on. Anyway, what I end up doing is developing my dark square bishop along this potentially strong diagonal. Right now, this diagonal is closed, but maybe later it could open. Secondly, I free up my ability to castle if I would like to, and I don't waste time trading queens because at this point, why would I do that? And in this position, I play bishop d7. Now, you might be saying, wait a second, wasn't there a fork there? Wasn't there an opportunity to fork? Yes, there is an opportunity to fork, and actually this is a good move in this position. White has an intermediate move to take and then move the bishop back either to c2 or e2. But I felt in this position, since I'm playing an International Master, he's just much better than me as a chess player. And especially when we get into the later game, into endgame, when the pieces come off the board, he's got a lot more knowledge than me. So I'm going to make him trade and take my queen as opposed to me taking his queen and just simplifying the game for us. So I developed the bishop to d7. White takes to avoid that fork with the pawns, and I take back with the queen. Now, as you see, the b7 pawn is hanging. But the problem is if the queen takes here, then there's a really good opportunity to hit the queen with the rook. Go to c7, then I can just take on b2. And I probably have the initiative here with black's king uncastled. I can castle next move. And there's just some weaknesses in the position. The queen is out of place. So we didn't go into this line, and he didn't take. Instead he plays knight d4. Now, the next couple of moves were a little bit inaccurate, but I'm a little bit nervous. I don't have a ton of time, and I just want to make some moves. So I drop my queen back to b6. He plays bishop b5. And still, there's a decent amount of tension in the position waiting to be resolved. I play bishop c8. He plays bishop c1. Castles. And after castles, he finally breaks the tension with bishop takes b6. Now, this move bishop b6 is a little bit odd to see from an IM because he just gives me the bishop pair right off the bat. I mean, I can take back if I want to with the pawn. That's certainly an option. And after queen takes b6, pawn takes b6, I've resolved my pawns. My pawn chain is actually entirely connected, and I have the bishop pair for free. Uncastled. This position isn't exactly closed. I mean, it's not totally open, but black definitely has a positional advantage here. And that's exactly what happens in the game. We get a3, we get c5, forcing the knight away. And again, I have a couple of decent options here, but what I choose to do is take more space in the center with e5. Also, what e5 does is it opens up some potential other diagonals for my light square bishop. My dark square bishop in this position also is pretty restricted by the pawn chain, and by playing e5, one of the things I'm able to do is potentially even better prepare d4, or if I want to, I can also play e4 later. So white plays c4, I respond d4, and I'm really liking this position, my ability to gain space, and gaining space with some snipers still on the board. And white doesn't have snipers. White has pieces that are good when the position's closed or when those pieces are close to my king. And right now, they're pretty far away from my king. So white plays knight e4. I play bishop c3, again, putting my bishop on a square where it can be a little bit active, where it's looking at an actual piece, and potentially skewering some of these pieces later on with the rook and the pawn. This is where it gets a little tricky. When time gets low, and as you can see, we're a bit low on time right now, the knights can be scary. But sometimes, even when you're playing stronger players, you got to just believe in yourself. You got to say, I don't believe you. What is this knight doing here? Is this knight really doing anything? And after looking at this position for a bit, you can say, no, the knight actually is not doing a ton. I can play a couple of different moves in this position to maintain an advantage, but why not just kick the knight out of town immediately? And that's exactly what I did. Rook cd8, and then the knight hops into f5. Very importantly here, the knight is hitting both the bishop and the pawn, and obviously this rook is also hitting the pawn on h6. Luckily for me, again, I spot the best move with bishop takes g2. I hit the rook and I open up entirely this light square diagonal, so my bishop is going to be even stronger after it moves. My opponent plays rook h2, which is actually one of the top moves in this position. I drop the bishop back to f3. Now, a move I probably should have made in this position is bishop b4. What bishop b4 does is it targets this knight on the light square, and maybe after something like, I don't know, let's say knight e7, I go king h7. I still have an advantage here, and this knight is actually pretty oddly placed, and it's sort of dominated by this light square bishop. So not a lot of good places for this knight to go. What I think I was a little bit nervous of was, what if he takes and I'm forced to take back with the king? Now, the thing here is that all my pawns are on dark squares, so I actually have an advantage on the dark squares anyway, and I definitely could have got away with this. But, of course, what happens instead is bishop f3. The knight drops back to g1, attacking my bishop. I reinforce the bishop instead of moving it, which, again, slight mistake, but look at the time. We have very little time left, so I'm just making moves, and I'm going. Luckily, my opponent makes a mistake. He captures the pawn on h6. I capture back, and after rook takes, king g7, hitting the rook. The rook is forced to move away. It does so to h2. I take my opportunity to crack open his king, which I definitely want to do with my well-placed rooks, and I take the pawn on e3. My opponent takes back on e3, and I play rook d3, infiltrating my rook into my opponent's defenses. I am targeting this pawn, and I want to take it. When there are pieces around your king, you definitely want to get rid of those, so that's what my opponent does. He gets rid of the bishop on f3. Again here, another good intermediate move. I take the pawn with the rook, giving a check and forcing the king to move, or for my opponent's block with the rook. If I were to just take the pawn right off, this is still a decent move, but why not just snap up this pawn if I can? So I give him a check, he blocks with the rook, and then I take the knight with the rook. My opponent plays rook c3, I take the rook, I simplify, and my opponent takes back. And so what you can see in this position is that my opponent has 5 seconds left. I have 25 seconds. There's no increment in this tournament. So my opponent literally has 5 seconds to make the rest of his moves. And where my brain immediately goes to is, okay, this endgame probably is winning for black. I'm up a pawn. I have better pawn structures. I don't have 3 pawn islands like my opponent does. My king is a little bit more advanced into the game as well. My opponent has a lot of weaknesses that I can target. I feel like I'm winning this position on the board. However, I don't have to go for the win here. In some of these cases, especially when you're playing stronger players, you just want to be gritty. You just want to go for a win, however you need to come by it, and so that's what I went for. I played a couple of quick moves here. Sacrifice a pawn to be able to target literally every single one of his pawns. After king f2, I start to take those pawns. My opponent goes for rook activity, but unfortunately he has literally no time, 3 seconds. I give him a check. I give him another check. He tries to go to a safe square. I take his a pawn, and after rook b7, I play rook takes g3, which over the board or in a slow time control, you would give this a double question mark. But in a game like this, where there's no increment and you have to make moves extraordinarily quickly, this I would actually consider to be a double exclam. Instead of a double question mark, a double exclam. Reason being is because it literally wins the game on the spot, especially if my opponent made a pre-move probably what he's expecting is to pre-move takes or pre-move, I don't know, moving the rook somewhere else. But the thing is when I take this pawn, he is forced to either move his king, which he can't really do to any square, except for f5 or h5. And of course, he doesn't do that quick enough. And with that, I secure my first ever win over an international master. I've got to say, which feels great, because I've been putting a decent amount of time into chess study, and to be able to win against a player like this, a player who is extraordinarily strong and talented, that does a lot to re-energize and reinforce my interest in studying chess. I hope you liked the video. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Let me know your thoughts below. What did you think of this game? Would you have played differently? Do you have a better recommendation against the London? Have you ever beat a player that was much stronger than you? As always, if you like this content, make sure that you subscribe. It really does a lot to support the channel. That's all for today. Take care, y'all.